Welcome to the game of poker. Once you play a hand, you're hooked, and now it's taking over. A love-hate relationship has just started. Keep your eyes on the prize, try to reach your target.
I wasn't really ever planning to stand in front of a university audience, let alone the Oxford Union. So what can I possibly entertain and enlighten this scholarly crowd with on a Saturday night? Well, according to the scriptures of Mr. Richard Dawkins, whom I had the pleasure to meet earlier today, it's a misapprehension that a scholar's distinction in one field implies authority in another. Well, my field of expertise lies in gambling. Whether we call it poker or backgammon or some strange Russian games, gambling is what I've devoted my life to. That's what I've been studying for nearly 2 decades. Although when Joe Barnard first threw this Oxford Union appearance at me, I had ideas to talk about religion, relationships, and randomness. But instead of filling in on my obscure ideas about Allah, Buddha, and Christ, and monogamy, it seemed more appropriate to take Mr. Dawkins' advice, stick to my guns, and talk about poker. I'm going to tell you that I'm a little bit nervous. I'm used to sit down with the likes of Phil Ivey and Patrick Antonius and play poker for what might seem insane amounts of dollars, but I actually find it a lot easier than standing in front of a big crowd. I might be a little sweaty and more nervous in front of you guys than actually when I try to pull off a big bluff against Mr. Phil Ivey. So that's my kind of way of saying that. Bear with me if I fuck up. Anyway, I've always felt pretty confident in doing radio shows and answering questions from various journalists, so I kind of decided today I was going to ask myself a question, and that might make it a little bit easier. Over the years, the question that I've been asked the most is like advice for an aspiring pro, some tips for a beginner. Do you have any recommendations on how I can improve my game? And admittedly, it's pretty much the most annoying question in the whole world. Nonetheless, I've tried to kind of mix them together and ask myself one question. What does it take to be or become a good poker player? Then, because of my meeting earlier today, I added a little twist. And the final question will be, does Richard Dawkins have the ability to become a good poker player? To answer a question of this magnitude, given the surrounding study halls and adding the fact that Mr. Dawkins is a distinguished professor, it only seems fair to go about it in a scientific kind of way. Therefore, we must take a step back and find out what skills and talents one must possess to make it as a poker player. As always, if you ask about 1,000 experts, you will get a ton of different opinions. So it only seems fitting to ask some of the great judicial minds of this century and get a court ruling. Although not unanimous, court rulings in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Sweden, and Denmark all declared poker a game of luck, not skill. So according to these numbskulls, it takes nothing, absolutely nothing, to become an accomplished poker player, since the amount of skill involved, as far as they're concerned, is too minuscule to calculate. Let's pause for a second, because I have the opinion that you basically have to be a moron to subscribe to such a load of crap. That's what I've been doing for 20 years, and it does take skill to become a good poker player. There is skill involved. So basically, I'm going to disregard those rulings and give my opinion on what it takes to master the game of poker. I have 7 points. Number 1, math. Remember, this is with a little Richard Dawkins kind of twist and my weird ideas. Math. As a biology professor, I'm pretty sure Dawkins is no stranger to 2 + 2 = 4. Granted, poker math is considerably more complex than that, but the ins and outs of pot odds and probabilities should not present a problem for a distinguished gentleman. I'm going to just advocate the good old 1 to 10. 1 sucks, and 10 is very, very good. So basically in the math, I'm just going to shoot and give Mr. Dawkins an 8. Number 2, emotional discipline. In his documentary, The Root of All Evil, Mr. Dawkins time and time again butt heads with priests, bishops, and religious fanatics basically the whole lot of advocates of what he calls non-thinking called faith, and yet he still managed to keep his composure. That bodes very well for his ability to stay calm in strenuous situations at the poker table. I'm going to give him another 8. Bankroll management. Many a successful poker player has thrown their career away and all their money on poor managing skills, sports betting, and big egos. Although I can't be sure, I haven't taken a look at Mr. Dawkins' finances. He doesn't strike me as the guy who wagers all his money on Barcelona, Man United, or sits down with his entire bankroll against Tom Dwan, me, and Phil Ivey in the $1 million Macau cash game. So I think he's fairly safe. But on the other hand, I've seen many degenerates with secret and unhealthy addictions. So I'm going to play it safe, split it down the middle, and give Mr. Dawkins a 5. Passion and commitment. No one, and I mean no one, becomes a great poker player overnight. It takes time and energy. One feature that all top poker players have in common is that they have spent countless hours trying to polish and perfect their game. Mr. Dawkins, on the other hand, is at the front line fighting what must at times seem like an unwinnable war against organized religion and thousand-year-old stupidity. He has shown remarkable perseverance in this fight that I personally hope will be won before some religious lunacy brings doomsday upon us. That kind of hard-working effort would translate well into all the sessions and hours you would have to put in at the poker table. I'll award a 9. Creativity and randomness. Although creativity is a 90% like positive word, and randomness is it's random, it's 50-50. I personally have a strong preference for random. Excuse me for wandering off, but random is the reason my mother gave me a backgammon set when I was 16, and I took a turn into what have been a fluctuating gambling career. Random is the reason why you sometimes call with aces, why you sometimes re-raise with 7 deuce offsuit. Random is the reason why Joe Barnard is engaged to Susie Batten, because their parents thought that Cambridge sucked and sent them both to Oxford. Random is the reason I'm an atheist, because I was born in Denmark, not a Southern Baptist born in Alabama, or a Muslim born in Iran. Random is, and I could go on. I'm actually going to finish it off because random is the reason you're unpredictable at the poker table, make it more or less impossible for your opponent to get a grasp of what you're thinking, what you're doing. Essentially, I believe you cannot beat random. You cannot beat random by being even more random. That doesn't exist. You're random or you're not random. So Dawkins describes in one of his books, The Selfish Gene, a simple game called Hawk and Dove, in which a cautious and cowardly dove would prosper in a world with all hawks and vice versa. The only evolutionary stable strategy in this hypothetical example would be if each individual would be 57.5% hawk and 42.5% dove. And furthermore, they would have to represent themselves as hawk or dove in a random manner that nobody could predict. This is, of course, a crude model, but it gives me the feeling that Dawkins has a good understanding of the strength of random. I do have one big problem, because in my game, I've tried to incorporate a homemade word, what I would call conscious randomness. Basically, you're aware of what you're doing, but you're doing it at random, and that's just extremely hard to do. I mean, I've come to the decision that we as human beings are pretty much the lousiest random generators there is. And that's why in this category, I'm only going to give Mr. Dawkins a 3, because I don't think anybody can really truly play the game of poker randomly as it's many a times is supposed to be played. So a 3 it is. Humility. One might ask where humility fits into the life of a gambler. And I kind of tend to agree, because a lot of the gamblers I know don't even have the word humility in their vocabulary. So nonetheless, I think humility is one of the key words for improving your game. If you don't have a humble bone in your body, the need or desire to refine your game is absent. And I'm going to quote somebody else than Richard Dawkins for once. Andre Agassi, a man on the top of the tennis world, said that he was always trying to get one day better. He was never trying to get 2 days better, but he would never accept not improving that specific day. In other words, he wasn't trying to reach for the skies, but he always knew that he could improve each and every day to the end of time. Dawkins has put it slightly different. He had a professor who had been advocating a theory for 15 years until a guest speaker showed up and basically very quickly demonstrated that the old theory was false, giving room for a newer version of the truth. And although the carpet has been dragged away under his feet, instead of just shaking his head, he went up and thanked the young professor for opening his eyes. It's two different stories, but it kind of shows the importance of willingness to learn and to admit when you're mistaken. Dawkins also says that he would gladly accept if somebody proved him and Darwin wrong. I think gladly is a wrong word, because I don't think he would be glad, but at least he says he will accept it. So anyway, in the humility department, I'm a little unsure, but he gets a 6. Last category, number 7, pattern recognition, reading skills, psychology. It's fancy words, but I think they fit in the same category. Being able to detect patterns that your opponents display, and at the same time keeping your own tells at a minimum, is paramount for a poker player. I don't know how it works in the world of science, biological science, but I think pattern recognition is kind of the heart and soul of understanding and achieving results in a lot of different ways. So that's why I actually think that Dawkins would be quick to figure out that when he plays against Joe Barnard, who hasn't bluffed him for 3 months, next time they sit down at the table, Joe is not going to bluff this time either. So Dawkins gets a 7 in the final category. Basically, I think I was just trying to show that a lot of people, Dawkins, etc., a lot of you guys here, has the ability to be a good poker player. It doesn't take superficial skills. I mean, you're not trying to lift the Wimbledon trophy or something like that, but it does take hard work and energy and obviously know what to focus on. I think that Dawkins could probably be a decent poker player. In real life, he sucks. He told me today that he's never played one hand of poker in his entire life. And one thing that might trump it all is that he has no experience. And you're not going to be a good poker player without any experience. I'm basically just going to finish off with another Dawkins quote from The Selfish Gene. By definition, luck, good and bad, strikes at random. And a gene that is consistently on the losing side is not unlucky, it's a bad gene. Then I just substituted gene with poker player, and this is going to be my final words. By definition, luck, good and bad, strikes at random. And a poker player that is consistently on the losing side is not unlucky, it's a bad poker player.
Okay, a quick message to any famous poker players out there just happen to come across this video. Please do get in touch if you would like to come to Oxford University and do something similar to what Gus Hansen has done this weekend. Come and maybe give a talk at the famous Oxford Union Debating Society, play in our Oxford Cup. We'd love to have you here if you want to take the time and the effort to come and play with us.
It's been good here in Oxford. Who knows, maybe I'll be back.